Well, thanks for staying with us on the program. It's time to dig into issues in the news as we look to critically analyze and dissect the headlines and news stories making the rounds. And what other place to begin with than from Lagos, hometown of Mr. President, where he is taking his end of year break, but still thought it wise to engage the media in his first media parley. Now, this morning, joining me in the studio is a publisher, Seun Oni. Compliments of the season to you.
Compliment of the season, and thank you for having me.
Well, let's get into the business of the day. Watching Mr. President chat with our colleagues yesterday, the key thing there was his position on the economic decisions he took through the year 2024. Now, and having listened to him, there's a need for us to analyze some of the statements that he made yesterday. He says he has no regrets, starting from his decision during his inaugural speech to remove subsidies, not minding the way the year has gone. Now, I'd like to get your perspectives starting from that statement, and then we'll analyze different aspects of his speech from yesterday.
What a good way to start. I actually watched with rapt attention, likely because that was his maiden media chat, like you rightly said. And I think the best place to begin with it should be that I think Mr. President actually has, unlike what we've taught over the past 18 months now in the saddle, he has a grasp of some of the things going on in the economy, which was so relieving for me because I had had this idea over the past few months that it seems he was actually divorced from the realities in the society. But the way he actually
articulated his points,
not the best of articulation, but you can actually see he has a grasp of the issues from security to economy to a wide range of issues that were thrown at him. And if you followed in course of the media chat, it got to a time, I think it happens if you have sat to interview people, you just get to a point and the journalists, how many of them? I think about six of them, all right, very respected journalists in the country. They were actually, I think a number of them will be surprised at the way he responded to a number of their questions. That was the good side. The other side should be, how well will this conviction, and that's exactly what I'm trying to drive at. He spoke like somebody who was convinced about the policies he's been churning out since he assumed the saddle. But the second, on the flip side, how far-reaching, how solution-oriented will these policies be? I think that will be left to the jury in the coming days.
Now, we're the jury because we're the ones most affected by these decisions. And like I said earlier, it's with his comments on fuel subsidy. Now, he's taking it a step further to even liken it to the season of Christmas. He used the word Father Christmas yesterday. Said Nigerian cannot be a Father Christmas when neighboring countries are benefiting from our subsidy, talking about the smuggling and importation, which they get at cheaper prices, whilst Nigeria, the producing nation, is now at 935 naira. He says he is not a fan of controlling prices. He believes in an open market, a free market where the forces of demand and supply determine the prices. Are you so happy with that position, in line with the fact that Nigerians were hoping for some respite in getting our refineries back on track and the coming on board of Dangote refinery?
Thank you for the question. But I think my reaction will not be whether I'm happy or not. It's going to be whether as a economy, we are practicing what is called economy. If the policy or direction that President had chosen is actually the best for us. In my opinion, he's more fixated on the theory of his policy than how practicable the policy actually is and how far-reaching the policy is in alleviating the plight of over 200 million Nigerians that have been put under unnecessary stress and pressure since he announced on May 29th, 2023 that subsidy is gone. You know, that's the beginning, that's the genesis, that was the genesis of all we found ourselves in. If you say, like Mr. President did say yesterday, that we are not Father Christmas for the neighboring countries, then that will be that the CNC is actually admitting that we have issue with our security architecture. That's a major admittance that we have issue with our security architecture. If fuel trucks, I mean long trucks, will drive across our border and head to surrounding countries, and fuels that are meant for the populace here can just be offloaded there so that a cheaper rate, all right, and cross back into the country without any deterrence. I think that is a security failure on our side. The second side should be this age-long idea of cabals in the subsidy sector. That again tells us that we have a whole lot of re-engineering to do when it comes to our oil market, which is the mainstay. The CBN released its Q3 report a few days ago, and we were told that the non-oil sector, growing by about 53.3%, actually had boosted the GDP of the country within for the Q3. But another thing we are not looking at is that our major revenue source still remains oil. And so if the cabal that we were always talking about for many years, if they can just ride rough shoulder on the country and people just go to CBN, oil they did not deliver, collect the money, or oil that they sold to black market operators, they can get paid for it, the fault should not be on the populace. The fault should be on the leadership. The leadership must find a way to re-engineer our oil sector, to re-engineer our financial system where people can get paid for the services they did not render, for the goods they did not supply, and that continue for decades. All right? That, in my opinion, should be the first player. I think it was Maupe Ogun that asked that question yesterday. If he, looking back now, if the president would have staggered some of those policies. And he said no, that whether you remove it now or you staggered it, you still have to remove it. And I think for me, that's actually not right. When you are dealing with a population where you have a huge chunk in poverty, when you are removing such policies, and like he said yesterday in one of his statements, I think it was one of the periods that I never expected him to say that kind of a thing. That was insensitive. That's one of the few things I thought he did not actually get right. When he said, well, for instance, it will not affect me. And that's the truth. It won't affect the rich guys. The impact will be felt on the poor, and that's what we are seeing. The stampede issue, government sources and himself yesterday tried to actually dismiss the fact that it was the dire economic situation that led to people running to go and collect a rise and all of this that led to the number of deaths we have recorded in the past few days. And the simple truth is that the economy is actually very dire. The poorest of the poor are getting poorer. You know, those days they will say there is a middle class, there is the low class. There is no middle class again. You now have the rich and you have the poor, and it's occasioned by the not too thoughtful way the policy was actually foisted on the country.
Now, talking about the stampede, he extended condolences to the families affected by the stampede, and he again used himself as an example. He says over the years, it has been his practice to share palliatives, or should I say end-of-year items, at his Bodilon residence, and he has never encountered a stampede. Is it borderline in the sensitivity gap like you talked about in terms of personal experiences in line with what has happened in recent time?
I would say yes, but there is a lot of sense in what he actually said too. For instance, he said for over 25 years consistently in his Ikyuior Bodilon house, he's always been given palliative, and there have not been issues like that. That again would tell you the nature. I grew up seeing people giving palliatives. I did not come up from a very wealthy family. Sometimes we are also in that situation where we have to walk to places where they give those kind of things. But what we used to see in times past is that someone will have 100 palliative to give. You will see 30-something people he will give out to you, and it's still left over. But now what we have in the country is when you announce that you are giving palliative, for instance, the Ibadan issue, you are giving palliative to 5,000. and by 4 a.m., you already have double that number at the venue. That tells you something is fundamentally wrong. People are hungry. People are in need of. We can't shy away from that reality. Yes, I know it's true, and every right-thinking person should know that if you want to provide, for instance, to give palliative to 5,000 people, you must put checks in place to ensure that people don't just people use the term, maybe the level of indiscipline in the country. I agree, there is a measure of indiscipline in the country. You go even to the banking hall, people don't want to stay on the queue. I mean, just about 10 of you on the banking in the banking hall. People don't want to stay their turn, and they want to jump the queue. You go to ATM, you want to use the machine. It's the same thing, all right? But again, it tells you that something is fundamentally wrong. If before now, yearly is a normal thing, people give palliative. This is not the first time people give palliative in the country. All right. But when you now see over a few days, it happened in Oyo State, it happened in the FCT here, it happens in Anambra State, and I learned it happened somewhere again, I think Abia also. That tells you something is wrong, and we must take it seriously. We must begin to know that the major purpose of governance is to ensure that people actually heave a sigh of relief, not people to be thrown into bondage, and they cannot actually fend for themselves. The basic necessities of life. Like I usually say, Nigerians are not asking for too much. We are not asking. In fact, you hardly see people talking about we want to go to the moon, we want to go to the sun, like other countries are talking about technological advancement. People are talking about, can we just have 3 square meals a day? Can we just have shelter over our head? Can we have decent job where we can make, decent living? I think those are the minimum. And the government must take that responsibility seriously.
Now coming back to statements made by President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, he says that the tax reform bills are pro-poor, that it is driven to make the poor in the country have access to more equitable sharing of the country's resources in terms of provision of basic infrastructure. Keeping this in mind, he has also talked about the fact that he has not taken from the NNPCL or Ways and Means in the past 18 months in office. When you look at statements like this, are they evident in what we're seeing with projections going into 2025?
Good omen. I did mention earlier, I'm one of the people who felt very, very impressed with Mr. President's position because he has a grasp of the fundamentals, and that's good. Again, how that will work in the coming days will be left for us to see. He alluded to the fact that the government, unlike the previous government, is actually not relying on Ways and Means, and that's good because that will rein in inflation, and we are seeing that consecutively. We have been seeing improved inflationary control. Also, we are also seeing that the margin, the convergence of the FS is also making a significant inroad. Bear in mind also the recent intervention by CBN to now digitalize the process, right? So we are beginning to see some of those convergence. But we must also bear in mind that this is a Yuletide period where a whole lot of remittances will be coming from the diaspora. That again can account for the reining in of our FX that we are seeing. He also went a bit further to also give us an insight into some of the things that the government is actually doing to ensure that we have a better economy in the coming days. Economic issues cannot just be taken on the paper, especially in Nigeria, where it seems most fundamental economic theories actually don't work like you have seen. For instance, we are taught in fundamental economic class that when you have when supply exceeds demand, price will fall. But in Nigeria, what we have seen for a very long time is that it doesn't matter the level of supply in the market, prices hardly
decline, drop.
They drop, all right? Those are basic things. But that again tells you that, but if you go back, economics will always tell you ceteris paribus, all things being the same, all right? So things are not equal, and that's where the government must go in, just beyond the policies. They must now go and look at some of the things that made these very well thought out, well crafted policies not to have effect on the generality. And that's where I will quickly speak to the other two tiers of government. The focus has always been on the federal government. Like I always tell people, when you have three parts of a whole, and one part is just about 47%, and the two other parts make up about 53%. Even if you score 40 over 47 over 100, it's still a bad score. We put so much searchlight on the federal government, and very little is actually said about the state and the local government. And that's where we are having this disconnect in the way we run our federalism. So much attention is put on how the government is run the economy, what it's doing to rein in inflation, create jobs, and all of that. But I know of a governor in this country who stayed in office for 8 years, and for consistently or throughout the 8 years, he was telling the people in the state that we don't have money, we can't employ anybody, and he kept to his word. He did not employ. There was no employment for 8 years. All right, but we always very quick, and there was no serious environment created for private sectors to thrive and employ people. So we must also begin to give equal attention that we've given to the federal government, to the state and the local government. When it comes to this economic issue, so much attention has been put on the federal government, and that's good. But we must also begin to put equal searchlight on what the governors across the 36 states are doing.
So if I understand you correctly, also urging the governors to borrow a lead from Mr. President. In the various states, we're also supposed to see end-of-year media chats with the governors to tell the people what they have done all through the year 2024.
Absolutely. But unfortunately, I know a few governors. I think Oyo State governor had his own a day before Mr. President, about 2-3 days ago. He had his own media chat. But you know how state governors actually behave in this country? They behave like the lords of the minor. Their House of Assembly is under their control. The media apparatachi in their state is usually under their control. When they do such media chat, what they do is that the state-owned broadcast houses, they are the anchor of the program. So most times the governor actually has a whole lot of those questions, and they just ask massaging questions that really will not clearly put the governor on his toes. Let me give you an instance. The governor of the state I came from, Ekiti State, did a media parley a few days ago. And for about, I had to switch off because for like 20-something minutes, about 24-25 minutes, the only thing I saw there was they said, we are going to leave a line so that you can call in and ask questions. Nobody will tell me that's not arranged. The people who called throughout the period said, well done. We have never seen, it was praise singing for 20-something minutes. Nobody called in to say, road. And I now traveled that same state a few days before that media chat. All the entrance to the state, all the roads, I'm not saying I traveled there. So this is a practical experience. All the states, all the roads that enter Ekiti State, they are not passable. All.
In terms of motorability?
They were not motorable. And nobody called to tell the governor that, Mr. Governor, the road from Kogi State into Ekiti is not motorable. The road from Akure into Ekiti, Ondo State, is not motorable. The road from Igbimo into Ekiti is not motorable. The road from Osun into Ekiti is not motorable. None of them called. All the way, we are seeing the good work, and I'm asking, what's the good work? So we must begin to see the attention we are giving to Abuja. Let's also give it to our various states so that we begin to see the other 53% of the country. They are also doing things right.
Now, let's come back to the federal as occasioned by Mr. President's chart yesterday. He also talked about the size of his cabinet. In Nigeria's history, the largest by far. And he says he's not sacking any ministers. But just at the start of the year in January, he promised Nigerians that he would fire non-performing ministers. At the close of the year, are you by this statement saying that you are very much pleased with the performance of all your ministers and none has been found lacking in even any way?
I think if you followed yesterday, he was very clear. He said all of them performed. Don't forget, he sacked 5 people, rejigged his cabinet. About 10 were moved to various other ministries. But I'm one of the people who believed that the major non-performers have not been exited from the system. I strongly believe that.
Why so?
No, there are, for instance, one of the reports we are working on now is to do a profiling of the ministries, and also side by side with some of the challenges in the responsibilities the ministries have been given. How far have they been able to meet those responsibilities? And the feelers are not too good. Some of them, for instance, like the Minister of David Umai, Minister of Works, he actually started like a house on fire. I remember how he was all across the country. He goes to project sites, and the TV, the radio, the newspapers were bustling with David Umai harassing contractors, telling them you are not supposed to use it, you are supposed to use a 15 mm, not a 7 mm. You know, all those photo ops, you know, lasted after a few while. And we are not seeing so much. The roads across the country. I traveled by road just a few days from Lagos, and the road was not good enough. People have a similar complaint across the country, and we must begin to ask ourselves: if you're a minister of works, the yardstick to measure your performance is going to be public utilities. It's simple. We are not going to measure your performance by how well you go to progress site and you are telling you must deliver on this. You must, you know. I told someone, you might not like the minister of FCT, for instance, but you can't you can't remove the fact that since he came on board, we are beginning to see a whole lot of infrastructural development dotting the FCT. That's how you know who is performing. It's not about calling journalists and you're explaining to them, we want to do this, we want to do that. We must begin to see the effect of what you are doing. And there are a number of ministers that I really think, in my opinion, is either they've not been placed in ministries where they can actually contribute so much. And Mr. President must think about that going into 2025. Secondly, you know, when you are too good at dismissing issues. Mr. President has a penchant to do that, and that's why a whole lot of people during the campaigns they will say it cannot talk. You know, I followed him a number of years because I covered the APC's headquarters, the APC headquarters. So I followed his trajectory for a few years. When people during the campaigns you were saying he cannot talk, I was just laughing. It can be a bit dismissive when you ask me a very serious question and he looks for very petty examples. So if you are not careful, you just think this person really don't know his onions. And that when he came and he said, let's assume you want to entertain 200 million people. You know, that was the illustration he used yesterday. You want to entertain 200 million people. How many caterers? How many sweepers? How many? No, this serious issue of governance. You are bringing ministers to oversee sensitive segments of society. And we have seen just very bright heads in the administration. Some of them have done well. They came in and they brought very novel, very articulate, very forward-looking policies. And it had changed a few things within the few period they spent there. But there are certain people that the only time you remember their ministers is during the weekly FEC meeting. You see them, they are seated there, or when they just show up in some of the events that have been happening in their ministry. Look at the sport minister, for instance. Until that ministry was permanently shut down, and instead a national sport commission was actually given life to. The minister was there. We used to know him as a very smart person, but he was there. He couldn't do anything. So he must begin to look at that. And he actually also raised a unit headed by Hadissa Bala Usman to go and never. We are still waiting for the report of that office. How far have they actually evaluated the performances of these people in in their cabinet. If they make it public, I think it will be a good one.
Now, still evaluating performance, and off the back of the example you use, citing Engineer David Umahi, the Minister of Works, this morning we hear reports that the Bureau of Public Procurement are beginning to receive documents to investigate the Lagos-Calabar Coastal Highway. Do you think that some of those controversies that have surrounded the project are some of the deterrents that have somewhat blown off the heat of the steam that he started with?
I really don't think so. I think the same issue that Mr. President had coming in is also what a number of his appointees had. And it's not surprising. It was John Maxwell that says everything rises and falls on the leadership. People just take a cue from you if you are their leader. You know, it was during his inaugural statement, he just blanket statement, subsidy is gone, without first looking at the books, without looking at the consequences. Like I usually say, the unintended consequences. You know, there is consequences of policies. There are also unintended consequences of policy. As a policy, especially a public policy maker, you must not just look at the consequences of your policies, you must also look at the unintended consequences of your policy. And that was exactly what happened also to the Minister of Works, David Umahi. He has this, what do you call it, El Dorado vision, right? But before you do that, in fact, before you say it out, you must have done very serious technical work. They didn't. And that's why we are where we are today. The road went through places that ordinarily shouldn't have gone through, and they have announced it's going to cut through XYZ. They have to start adjusting, and that's why the project has not actually gone far. But why they were at that? Why not focus on other roads in the country? Why not focus on other infrastructures in the country? During the immediate past administration, we had the minister of the former governor of Lagos giving very huge responsibility. He was the Minister of Works, he was the Minister of Land, he was the Minister of Housing. You could recollect at that point. And we said, no, that was too much responsibility for one person to oversee. But now he has his job cut out. So all these doing press statements and doing media chat will not help. You must just go back and know that what Nigerians want to see, we want to see real deliverables. We want to see that. And those deliverables must be inclusive, must be far-reaching, and must meet the immediate needs of Nigerians. And that will also allow me to speak to the budget presentation that has generated a few of those issues. When you say we don't have enough money and we must deal with the money we have, like one of the House of Rep members rightly put it, and you are still having ministries writing for motor vehicles year on year. You are putting huge sums in billions for travels. You are putting huge sums for simple things like feeding, entertainment, right? And you say we don't have money. No, we actually have money. It's just that we have not prioritized our spending. And in 2025, the government must actually look seriously, look inward, and ensure that they prioritize the migrate. They want us to believe that we have very mega resources. We don't have mega resources, but it's very little. But that little must be prioritized to ensure that it works for the needs of Nigerians.
Now, moving on to other issues in the news, and then moving past the media parley yesterday, it's important to also note that a body language of the current administration has been in attracting foreign direct investments. This is the second item we're going to be discussing, and the president is very adamant that the economic incentives that he is given to the countries he has visited, which is part of the talks of trying to downsize on the ESTA codes and the entourage that follow him for foreign trips, he's still very adamant that he is on course to attracting investors to Nigeria with these economic incentives. Now, weighing the pros and the cons, how will you judge this direction in which Mr. President is tilting towards?
I heard him. He was working so hard. I think it was a lady from Bloomberg that actually was consistently asking questions around the foreign direct investment into the country. And I was just smiling because when it comes to issues around foreign direct investment, what most people don't know about money, or let's say investment is actually neutral. All right, it goes where the climate is conducive for it to thrive. You don't need to go after people and pursue them, come and invest here. And when people started talking in the last administration that factories are closing up, they are going to surrounding countries, that is actually a fundamental nature of money and investment. It simply goes into a place where it is welcomed. And how is it welcomed? The light issue in the country, I think he admitted that yesterday, that we have serious shortfall. If our light issue still remains as it is, it doesn't matter. You can visit the whole countries in the world, just abandon Aso Rock. And what you do practically every day when you wake up is to shuttle the entire nations in the world.
Go globe-trotting.
Just be globe-trotting. You will not attract any foreign direct investment. If the state of our roads, the way they are, still remains, you will not attract any serious investment. If our tax system, all this argument we are having, no, it's pro-nut, it is anti-nut that we are having. It goes beyond that. Our tax system is a major reason. The chairman of Mr. Oyedele of the fiscal
presidential
tax force, he always, the first thing they did when they were commissioned was actually to go around and gather factual evidences around why do we have this kind of a comatose tax issue in the country. And a major reason, manufacturers majorly, that they pointed to is the fact that the taxing system is so punitive. We have a punitive tax system that if you are not careful, and people really don't look at it from that. Have you asked yourself why we have more Asians, people from other countries starting up companies in Nigeria? And we are very wealthy guys. You know what they prefer to do? They prefer to put their money in real estate, put their money in debentures, in bonds, and all of that, even outside the shores of the country. Because they know that the taxing system here, if you are not careful, and that's why I was so excited, I was so elated when I came here physically. I saw the great work that ADBN is doing here. There are people who have even much more money than your proprietor here. But the problem is that the moment you open, local government will come knocking that there is a tax you need to pay. The federal FCTA tax will walk in here, and before you know, they practically you are punished for investing. And so the tax reform, one of the things it seeks to cure is that punitive side. And so I'm surprised when governors, no matter, I don't care which state they are coming out from, is anti our people. No, it's not anti anybody. Because until we get our taxing system right, I've worked with a few people, and that tax issue has always been complained, that people complain about. So we must look at our tax system, and several other things I've actually highlighted. The president also mentioned our internet connectivity yesterday. I think on a few occasions I've tried to join, and the internet is terrible.
Very true.
Very terrible.
On that internet issue, there's also the challenge with fintechs and commercial banks over 250 billion naira USSD debt. The telecom sector has also been clamoring for an increase in tariffs. The NCC has been, would I call it, a little bit diplomatic about the approach owing to the current economic climate. But I hear that 2025 is a year in which the telecom sector, in fixing this internet connectivity, might be considering a hike in tariffs. Do you think that it is well situated to take place in 2025?
Unfortunately, I will need the fundamentals, all right, the variables to be able to say yes or no to that. But just to butt in, the CBN report about our GDP for Q3 actually shows that is a fintech in the ICT subsector that actually drove the major growth we saw in the country. And that tells you that a whole lot is actually going on in that area. But the USSD controversy, for me, I think is just around the question of the chicken and the egg. Which one actually comes first? The fintech actually have seen an area that they are actually maximizing. And if you see the number that came up, most people in the industry did not give them this number of this level of growth that we saw. There were people, I don't know if you saw those kind of things. Don't put your big money in this small, you know, some of those names that are popular that people don't put your money in them because they might close anytime.
But that's where the trust of most Nigerians are.
Unfortunately, they are growing by the day. I think it was a few days ago. There was a saving we kept somewhere. So I was having a discussion with my wife, and she said, "Oh, where's that money?" And I told her I kept it in there. So he said, "You put our money there?" And I'm like, they are giving better interest rate. In fact, their interest rate comes on a daily basis. Unlike the banks, where you put your money and the next time you go, the money is reducing. You know, it's only in Nigeria you put money in a savings account and you go back there, the money is reducing rather than appreciating. It's a terrible one. There was a day I had to carry textbooks and I started studying. What's the explanation? They will give you 2 naira and remove 20 naira for SMS. All right. And instead of your savings account to be appreciating, it's actually depreciating. But these guys came and they don't wait till the end of the month. Like this morning I was coming in here, I've already seen the alert for today. All right. So by tomorrow again, they give you alert for the increase, and people are actually tilting towards the side. But don't forget that the people in the IT too, the internet, so they saw the business side there and they wanted to take advantage of it. So NCC, CBN said, no, you have to stick to one responsibility. That was where the major issue actually came from, right? They wanted to, in fact, some of them actually went and took license. MTN took license at that time. I could recollect MTN had a license where they made something they call wallet, where you can put and things like that. But it did not work out because the regulatory framework knew that it can be abused. When you are in charge of the infrastructure and you're also in charge of the other services you are rendering, that you can abuse it. Okay, for instance, you can decide not to give your competitors internet. You know it's possible if you are the one running the internet and you're also running the same time. You can decide not to give them the internet connectivity. So
there's a downtime there.
There's a downtime there, and people are rushing to you. So people who regulate actually think about those kind of things. I think what should be done in the interim is to see how what the president did when they came in, when we had issue with foreign airlines, their funds not being allowed to be repatriated. So there was a major issue around that, and the presidency came and said, no, we will not do that. We will just give you a window, and if you can provide the necessary documents, we will ensure we repatriate the funds that are due to your company. And I learned everything had actually been resolved. The same should be done too. If there is any financial obligation you needed to be paid, maybe create a window, 3 days, 7 days maximum, let it be cleared. Let it be a written law, so that anybody who runs foul of that, there will be penalties. You see there will be improvement in that industry. I think if they explore that, issue of raising tariffs or not will be, like I said, will be based on, economic fundamentals. Yes.
Well, it's an interesting discourse with Seun Oni this morning. We're looking at critical issues in the news. We've reviewed Mr. President's median presidential media chart. We've also talked about his vision to direct investments into the country with better incentives, particularly from the angle of tax reforms. But whilst we talk about the economic angle to the outlook for 2025, one key indices is also the health of Nigerians. Now, there are some diseases that have been linked to poverty, one of which is Lassa fever, with the prominence of rodents, which are the vectors that carry this infection. Now, the NCDC also engaged the media to highlight the review of 2024. And this year alone, quite sadly, 109 deaths have been recorded to Lassa fever, over 1,154 cases as well. Now, the NCDC has moved to place this response on an emergency alert. Now, when we look at the NCDC, and many always applaud them for the work done during the pandemic, that was one of the periods Nigerians actually knew how engaging and how vital statistics and data from the NCDC can be. But it almost feels as though, since it's not COVID, Nigerians are sleeping on Lassa fever. In some quarters, like I said, people are saying it's a disease for the poor, and why should we be worried?
Unfortunately, when I saw the figure, I just, what came to my mind is that we must just begin to take some of these health issues more seriously. That number of casualty from Lassa fever, I think, is avoidable because if you look at some of the causative factors, that's why some people had actually said is a poverty precipitated emergency. But it has to do with, you know, when you say you see rodent in a place and things like that, you know, dirty environment and things like that. And maybe I will say that our local government system and our state system need to also activate, like we saw during the COVID pandemic. You know, state government, maybe because of the number of mortality we saw then, a lot of state government upped their ante and they began to take some of those health emergencies serious. And so we need to do that also so that we don't record, we don't just lose life to things that can be prevented.
Now, in moving on, leaving the health emergency, and it's important that we see that response from the grassroots level, the third tier of governments. There's also a response in terms of what Nigerians are dealing with at this end of the year. There is a sense even from non-Christians that it's the end of a financial year and there ought to be some sort of, even if it's not a loud celebration, some regulars in providing for the family or gathering together as a community to thank God for the year in view. But this has been challenged by the availability of cash. Now, this brings the CBN back into the conversation. Over the years, we've talked about the need to transition Nigeria into a cashless economy. The Naira design policy affected SMEs, but now people are also losing trust in the bank. Now, the CBN issued a directive that, by some reports in some quarters on the Daily Independent this morning, ATMs are beginning to function again. Before now, a lot of people only thought that the POSs are the ones striving because there is an intention to ensure that that becomes a thriving sector on its own, or subsector on its own. In line with this reports this morning of the CBN directive, how do you envision Nigeria goes forward to tackle this issue of cash crunch, which even after the Naira design policy has come to stay within the Nigerian context?
Thank you. I did a lot of travel the past few weeks, and I was badly affected. I was at the bank, one of the banking halls, and I was told I could not withdraw more than 20,000. And I was like, what will I do with 20,000 naira?
And you're on the road?
I was on the road. So I had to go meet the POS guys. At some point I was paying, I was giving 10% of
whatever you withdrew.
Of whatever I withdrew. 10,000, 1,000. And it was that bad. It was that bad until a few days later it eased out. But something happened this morning where I was coming out, and that for me tells you, like you said, people are losing faith in the bank. I think I studied it. It took a while before I knew what was going on. I would have actually done a video to buttress what I was trying to say. I saw about 6 bike guys in front of a POS guy. Somebody running a POS. So I was like, what are you doing here this morning? Not too far from where I stay. And the next thing I saw, that we were bringing their cash, they were giving it to the POS guy.
To keep for them?
Yeah, so he would transfer to their
accounts.
Okay, so before now, I usually think that the banks, all the money, they usually give it to the POS guys, and that's why we don't have money in the bank. We did a report on that, by the way, about 2 weeks ago. It was an exclusive work we did on that. But I now discovered that due to the problem people have with banks, you want to go and deposit money. Sometimes you'll be on the queue, you want to withdraw. They tell you can't withdraw certain threshold. So what some of those guys usually do is that their daily or weekly, the money they make throughout the whole week, they will now go and give these POS guys. So that's why they are always having cash. By the way, now the question will be, why do we have scarcity of cash in the banking halls? The reason we have scarcity of in the banking hall is simply because the big guys who really don't go to banking halls, they
also
simply
stash
sit
at home.
they sit in their offices and call the banks. I need 2 million cash, I need 5 million cash. They will bring it. They get more from those kind of high net worth people than somebody like me. I went there. How much did I want to withdraw? I wanted to withdraw 100,000, but somebody is asking for 5 million. When they are going, so I visited someone, a high net worth person, and I was sitting and said, "Oh, sorry, please, just hold on. Are you around?" I said, and the next thing, a bank staff came and brought millions of cash, bill, mint cash, and gave. I said, "Oh, this is why we don't have money in our banking house. That's why we don't have money." So I think it's a regulatory problem. And issuing press releases will not solve it. We must. One of the responsibilities of banking of the Central Bank of Nigeria, as the apex bank in the country, is actually to also regulate the operations of the day-to-day operations of the commercial banks. And part of the regulation, according to the power in the CBN Act, is actually to anyone who run foul of the regulatory framework of the CBN to also be punished. We need to start seeing that. I think it was last week I heard 2 of the banks were fined certain amount. We must see it to be more consistent. You go to a bank, maybe they have come out now and say banking hall should put cash in their. So if there are reports like that, they've dropped numbers, and I want to believe a lot of people that have been calling them, give us feedback. How many calls did you receive in a week? Let us have a list of banks that defaulted week by week. Be publishing it. Like I always say, when there is no deterrence, people will continue on a negative path. But when there are deterrence, people will be more cautious. So when you begin to publish banks, maybe 2,000 branches, and this bank alone, they have more than 800, their CEO will call their branches and say, what is happening? Possibly deal with their branch managers or operation managers at the branch levels. And we begin to see some level of sanity. Some really don't have confidence in the banks as it were again. They prefer to put their money in these fintech companies and go to POS people and withdraw. Until CBN gave this withdrawal charges on some of these fintechs. Before now, you even withdraw at zero. Unlike banks, after some withdrawals, banks will start removing money, but they will not even withdraw. But even as we speak now, their charges are still more affordable compared to the other banks, and that's where CBN needs to come in. They must take their regulatory work much more seriously, because it's actually something that is not welcome, especially during this Yuletide period. We have too many responsibilities that will require us to use cash. There are some market purchases that people want to make,
especially
petty trading that you can. They will tell you no. They will even tell you I'm not collecting cash.
Now we have just 2 more aspects to touch on because of time. One on is the angle with the report from the economic management team that has placed 31 states now on alert for food shortages and food crisis. The concluding angle is with the cost of transport hike. I know last year the federal government had a 50% slash initiative which they're looking to bring about again this year. But when you look at these 2 issues, food crisis and transportation hike, despite the Dangote MRS partnership, how do you always come to the conversation of the end of year hike in commodities? Do you think it's a sharp market practice, or do you think it is indeed a reflection of who we are as a people?
No, many factors would explain that. When we just look at the outcome and we don't look at the variables that led to the outcome, our narrative might actually not be very correct. For instance, this year, 2024, this is the first time in my life I'll be so involved in farming. I grew up in a farming family, but so much of subsistence farming. So this year I just took the bull by the horn. I would go into a bit of commercial farming. And it was a very terrible experience for me. I planted maize, beans, and sweet potato. Those were the three things I planted. By the time it was time to harvest, Fulani took cow, into the farm and finished virtually everything. Virtually everything. I was just able to get just a handful of beans and corn. It was a very, very wide expanse of land. Of course, you should know that as we speak now, a lot of places in Northeast, people have not been able to return to their farm due to banditry in those areas. So the moment you don't have enough food in the market, the prices of food will go up. It's just normal. We can go back and later talk about transportation issue, but there is something before you even start transporting. If you don't have enough food, it's the very little you take to the market. And definitely, if the supply is below demand, just elementary law of economics, your price will rise. And I'm not just the only one that was impacted. When I started speaking to other people, we had a similar issue. They graze your farm, and one of my neighbor actually was able to accost one of their. When they got to the police station, and they discovered the damages they've done, they did not even return back again. They took a cow. So if they sell the cow, the damages they've done in the farm will not pay. So they just abandoned the cow and left. It was that bad. So we have issue with insecurity. We have issue around. He said it yesterday that people cannot be farming the way his forefather actually farmed. What is the government across the 3 tiers? What are they really doing to ensure that people can now farm in a modern way? All right? Because when you do that, you can now scale up farming. You can scale it up. I'm of a firm opinion. There is no state in Nigeria that should have shortage of food. No single state. We are so blessed. We have arable farmland. We have decent weather that, in fact, some states you can do farming all year round. So why should we be talking about food emergency in a country as ours? We just need to get our priorities right. Going into 2025, we must get to a point where the government, there is this idea that business is not for government. It's not in a country like this where poverty is so huge. Sometimes I think government at some level, maybe local government level, should take the initiative. Have farms. Let possibly all our local government, except those who are in the urban where they don't have arable land, right? But those who have arable land, why not? While I was growing up, I used to know that my local government, for instance, in Ekiti East local government, they have poultry, they have piggery, where at the end of the year like this, they sell at discounted prices, not at a loss. People usually make that mistake, that when you say, for instance, you are selling a bag of rice for 40,000, it's because government have paid certain discount. It's not necessarily true. At about May, if you pull resources together, we were still able to buy directly from farmers a bag of rice for that 40,000. So it's not actually, it was discounted, but it was not a loss. Possibly selling for the same amount they bought it from farmers. But of course, business people won't do that. So when you have all our local governments doing that kind of a thing, they have their own farms. And so they can sell not with the profit intention of a business owner. I think it was a Kolade Otitoju that asked him yesterday, do you plan doing price control? And he said no.
Well, Seun Oni, very analytical, ever mercurial. I must thank you. Time is fast spent on our review segment, but we do appreciate you for your objectivity to the issues in the news.
Thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to be here. And again, compliment of the season.
Well, season greetings to you and yours. We wish you the best of the season.